Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be again here at Montana Tech and speaking to people who have a lot of expertise in innovation, in restoration. And then it's also a pleasure to have listened to my own student. And then it's always good that if your student does better than you. And I have a couple of them on the faculty there. All of them are doing very good. And in the process, they are also pushing me along. And then that's the reason why I do many things. And then this is one such thing that I am basically trying to do. And then I have put a student on it. And it's very interesting. I have a couple of disagreements with what was said earlier. Reason is we will be talking about that. And then there are certain new things also coming to my mind, which I will share with the students. Probably they may take those ideas up and then work on those. Anyway, I shall be speaking on, say, can we model distribution of invasive alien species under a climate change scenario? All of us know our Vice Chancellor, Professor Talat is a geologist who has interest in climate change. He knows it better than anybody else, that climate change is a reality. And then this is not reality in, say, US or in Europe. It is a reality in Himalaya as well. And then Himalaya is warming much more than the global average. And we would take one example of Parthenium hysterophorus and ask ourselves a question: if a species which is of South America or a Central American origin, can it make inroads into Kashmir Himalaya? I mean, this would be very interesting, and this would, say, provide you the predictive power of, say, telling people or managers beforehand that these are the potential species that can move into your area under the influence of climate change, and you need to be very aware of all this. And then because when they first move in, and then you know that they are very disastrous, you can very easily control them. Now, you know, and I know for certain that climate change has increased the risk of, everybody says that climate change has increased the risk of biological invasions. But I believe that distribution of both native as well as non-native species would change. It is not necessary, I do not buy this argument, that the climate change would necessarily increase biological invasions. And I would try to actually explain it with the example that I have taken. It's not necessary that a species would be favored in every spatial context by the climate change. In certain places it may be helped, in certain places it may not be helped. And that actually you need to do or study. Now, question is that if climate change is going to influence both native and non-native species, then you would be always interested in knowing that what could be the future distribution of these species under various climate change scenarios. What type of species from, say, 20 years from now I'm going to expect, say, in Kashmir? Or what type of species, what is going to happen to, say, for example, Coneza canadensis or Parthenium hysterophorus, or for that matter, Phragmites australis, in, say, North America under the influence of climate change? These are very pertinent questions. And then the management that you have to actually put in place would be contingent upon your knowing of the species that are likely going to actually make way into your areas. Now, point is this, that you are going to have an entirely different type of an environment or a climate setting. You should expect a different type of species, and you need to have, say, ways of knowing as to what would be those species which would make inroads into your ecosystems in the event of climate change. Now, for this, people have taken recourse to use of modeling. Species distribution modeling, or what's also called as ecological niche modeling, is followed. And then there are those of you who are botanists or who are ecologists must be knowing that ecological niche is a very abstract concept. There are several definitions of it. There are many people who have given definitions. Odom has given definition, Clark has given, Ilton has given. But most influential treatment of ecological niche is of G. Hutchinson. He says that niche of a species or an individual is an n-dimensional hypervolume. Now it means that a species has requirement for light, it is a dimension. It has requirement for nitrogen, it's a dimension. It has requirement for space, it is a dimension. It has requirement for light, it is a dimension. And then this species has optimal requirement of all these needs, right? And if you join these n dimensions, it gives you a hypervolume within which you are saying that everything that is required by a species exists. This is an idealized niche where you have everything that you require for yourself to grow and to perpetuate own generation. And this is what basically, this is the definition with which we would be, say, following the modeling part of it. And then this is an example of the dimension. This is elevation, this is temperature, this is latitude, so on and so forth. Now, species, this is the, if a species was without its enemies, without its competitors, it is expected that it would occupy this entire n-dimensional hypervolume. But under natural conditions, this species would face competitors which have similar requirements. And this species is not going to be allowed to occupy this entire hypervolume. Instead, it would be restricted to, or it would be allowed to realize a very small portion of that idealized niche, but that small realized portion is sufficient enough for this species to grow and replace itself. Now, this is a hypervolume of species 1. In this hypervolume, it does not have enemies. It gets all the resources. It would expand. And in natural conditions, there is a possibility of such type of thing happening, but more often than not, the species would be competing with, say, this species with this species, and ultimately it would be able to realize this part only. Now, this is a distinction has to be made between the realized niche and the fundamental niche. And in ecological niche modeling, you are not working with the fundamental niche. Instead, you are working with the niche that the species has realized in its space which it occupies, right? Now, as regards Manzoor's point that if a species moves from, say, North America, right, to, say, Kashmir, and it moves in the same environmental space, whether it should be called as an invasive or not, if there has not been a human support, if there has not been, say a natural, say, agency carrying this species from this place to Kashmir, then this would be called as invasion. The reason for this is that it is a golden rule in ecology that there are less number of niches, more number of species, because geographical barriers, isolating mechanisms have not allowed a species to occupy all its niches. And it is because of that, in nature, you have much greater diversity of species than could have been possible if a species was allowed to occupy all its niches. A species could move from North America, but because of the dispersal limitations, it doesn't reach Kashmir. It does not occupy the niche there, which it could have otherwise. And that empty niche is occupied by some other species, and it basically creates the diversity. Now, in that sense, the species once moves from one place to another, it does displace a species, it does displace some organism which had occupied that space, and more basically diverse the ecosystem, the better it is. Now, for modeling, what you have to do is that you shall have to get to know that what defines this niche space of a individual or a species. There are limitations with modeling. Those of you who are interested in this, they must be knowing that the biological component is not basically, say, considered in the ecological niche modeling. And in the niche is a concept which is used in retrospect. It is not used in prospect. Once a species occupies the place, then we define it, then niche can be defined. You can't say that these many people would be able to occupy this room and this is the number of niches in a room. No. Instead, once people move, how they interact with others, how they sit, and once they have occupied these spaces, then alone we would be saying that these many niches were worked out in this room. This is how this niche theory works. Anyway, what do we do is that you must first of all determine the requirements, the temperature requirements, nitrogen, altitude. These are all dimensions. If you have data, more data, better modeling it would be. Then what do you do is, then you basically have this data of the requirements of a species for time 0, that means current. These are basically the requirements of this species at time t plus 0. Then what do you do is, then what could be, then you model, I mean, at time t plus 1, say from 20 years from down the line, for 40 years down the line, where such type of conditions would be present. So far they were here, after 20 years they will be here. We'll be predicting that on the basis of the conditions now existing here, the species would move from here to here. Now why? Because we know that these are the conditions that are required by a species. In the event of climate change, these conditions would not be existing there, instead they would exist somewhere here. And niche, since we believe, is conserved, and as such, on the basis of those requirements, which we expect, say, somewhere here, we predict that this species would move from here to here. Now this is the output, I mean, that you get from all this modeling. Better the occurrence data, more the occurrence points, better would be modeling. More robust basically the data about the requirements of species, better would be the output. And then there are certain steps which one has to follow in modeling. One is that you shall have to get the occurrence records, the distribution data. You should be very correct. I mean, the identity of the species should be correct. Geographical coordinates should be correct. And then if you have a larger data set, all the more better. If you have a smaller data set, it's going to be a problem. Then you get the environmental data sets. You have, say, at WorldClim, there are sites available, or you can have your own data about a species regarding the climatic requirements. Then you have a model generation and you calibrate it. You work out basically the validation of the model, whether it is working or not. You have it trained basically, that means you give it 100% record, you have which you know, that if I say restrict 30% of the records, whether it would be able to predict basically correctly the distribution of those 30% of the points or not. That is how you say validate a model. And then once you have validated it, then the projections that this model makes, naturally you are going to take them seriously. Why? Because the model is valid. It has, I mean, whatever the projections are there, they could be taken seriously. Now, there are huge number of models which are available in literature. You can have, I mean, climate envelope basin approach, and this Maxent, which is quite commonly followed. Each model has its own weaknesses, each model has its own strengths. Then in due course of time, people realize that why shouldn't we be having something in which we have all models, isn't it, fed together, right? And then have something, a sort of a ensemble type of a thing, that all the strengths of all the models are taken into consideration. And then you have a composite model based on all most of these individual models, so that the prediction is improved. And then naturally the validity of the data is also actually taken seriously. I mean, I have followed Ensemble. It is Biomod 2, the package. It uses both presence as well as absence. There are models which use presence data only. There are models which use presence as well as absence. And then it's an R platform, right? So Hiller is the person who did it. Then you have to get occurrence records would be there, model would be there. Then you require the environmental data. You can have your own environmental records, you can have data on pH, you can have data on nitrogen, you can have data on climate, but globally there are, say, sites available where from you can download the climatic data at different spatial scales. I used the spatial scale of 5 kilometers, 2.5 arc seconds, which I believe was quite good, was useful to use for the species that I selected. Now this is the species that we chose. There are a couple of reasons for this. One, that we have recorded couple of occurrences of this species in Kashmir. Ordinarily, we should have been expecting this species only in Jammu, which is a subtropical place. Beyond Jammu, it should not have moved. Now, gives us indication that there would be a new invader coming to your place, and as such, you need to be, the agencies need to be alerted about it. A species which belongs to Asteraceae compositae is called as Congress grass or a carrot grass, right? Is amongst the 100 worst invasive species of the world, we would have been very, complacent at our places. At least this is not our problem. But in the event of climate change, this species is also going to be an issue. Now, as such, the invasion biologists have to be alert to the environmental changes that are happening around them. As such, those species which they were expecting not to be invaders in their places, in the event of climate change, they may expect them also to there, and as such, they should have to be alive to this reality as well. Now, this is a native of Central and South America. It's reported to be invasive in 40 different countries in Asia, Africa, Australia. They say that it got accidentally introduced in India, in Pune, way back in 1956. People say that under PL 480, the wheat grains were transported to India, and it was a contaminant in the wheat grains. But there are herbarium records prior to the PL 480 shipment of wheat grains, which somehow points towards the fact that this species has been, say, transported to India through other means as well, much earlier than that has been reported. Now, but in our place, was not expected. This is the area in which it is native, and this is the area. Look at India. These are the areas where it is non-native, and in non-native, it is not necessary that it would be invasive also. That also needs to be basically taken note of. Now, when we were doing this work, something struck us, and then many people have now started publishing in that direction. Point is that when you say native versus non-native, you are lumping all the non-native regions together, when the history of invasion in these non-native regions is different. In some place, the species might have been introduced 100 years before. In another place, it might have been introduced just 50 years before. As such, the niche of this species in an area where it was introduced 100 years before would be entirely different than in a place where it has been just introduced. And its genetics also would be different, so on and so forth. That means the time period that is taken for species to get introduced in the species is also something very essential. Now, this is India, where it is, say, predominant. This is Australia, where also it is invasive. This is the Africa, where also it is a problem. But our area, we were expecting that it would not come to our place. Anyway, we tried to model it. We got, say, occurrence records. We did it a survey. We got occurrence records from herbaria also, from other IFGBF also. And ultimately, we got 7,185 occurrence records of this species. That means we have geographical coordinates of, say, this species known from 7,185 geographical locations. And of these GeoCoordinates, we have now the climatic data also available, right? We have downloaded climatic data of these, say, you have a geographical location like this species occurs here, we know that what are the climatic conditions in this, right? And then all there are, say, 19 variables available at World Film. There is a possibility of, say, correlation, strong positive correlation between different, say, environmental variables. If you use all of them, there is a possibility of, say, multicollinearity. There would be problems with the model prediction as well. As such, we tested these for, say, collinearity, and then ultimately arrived at just 10 of the 19, which we thought are not related to one another, right? Autocorrelation effects in modeling are not going to be there. As I selected them along with altitude. And we basically, you all know, everybody knows, that from this assessment report 5, the climate change scenarios are presented as RCP scenarios, representative concentration pathway scenarios, right? You have 5 scenarios. You have an RCP of 2.5, you have RCP of 4.5, 6.0, and 8.5. What it means, and they have simplified it, it means that carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere, which would heat the Earth's atmosphere system to the extent of, say, for example, 8.5 watts per meter, isn't it? This is what basically the RCP means. That means 8.5 is the extent of warming that would take place in a worst case scenario of climate change. And the median is 6.0, that means there would be a warming of 6 watts per meter square as a result of climate change, right? That means 2 is business as usual and 8 is a worst case scenario. Now what do you do is that you say that what could be the possibility of a climate in Kashmir or in India or in North America or in Missouri or Montana Tech if concentration of carbon dioxide is say 8.5 or RCP scenario of 8.5 is realized. And then we used a model and then used two, I mean the temporal time periods. One is of one is of 2050, the other one is of 2080. Now we used these are the 10 algorithms that we used in the ensemble. There are about 42 separate independent algorithms used for the modeling. We combined the 10, and as such the 10 combined models, it is expected, are going to give you better predictions than the models used independently and separately. We corrected for certain biases as well, and then we model with this we model basically the distribution of Parthenium hysterophorus at different spatial scales. One, we model the distribution of Parthenium hysterophorus at global level. What is going to happen in the event of climate change to Parthenium hysterophorus under climate change, right? What is going to happen the next? What is going to happen to Parthenium hysterophorus under the influence of climate change in India, because we are interested in India. Then we also did a study, modeling for what is going to happen to Parthenium hysterophorus under the influence of climate change in Kashmir. Now, ordinarily one would expect that whatever happens in the event of climate change to Parthenium hysterophorus at global level, similar trend one should expect at a regional level and a local level also, but that is not correct. And we would be presenting to you results which suggest that something is happening at global level, at a country level, but a reverse trend you should expect at a more local state level, isn't it, like Kashmir. And as such, to argue that climate change is going to be, say, promoting invasion at all spatial scales is not correct. At one scale it may promote, at some other scale it may not promote at all, right? And that is what's basically the take-home message, that if you are, say, lumping together everything, you may arrive at erroneous conclusions. You may conclude that this species is going to actually dwindle in fortunes in the event of climate change, but the same species in some place may cause a huge problem. Why? Because there the climate change would favor basically this species. That is what is happening with Parthenium hysterophorus, right? Now you should look at, the red part, wherever you have red, it is the most suitable area for Parthenium hysterophorus to grow. Now, if you look at India, lot of red. If you look here, it is native range, lot of red. If you look here, lot of red. If you look here, lot of red. Now, this is highly suitable. This is suitable, moderate, less suitable. And wherever you have green, this is an unsuitable area. And this, if you look at our place also, it was also unsuitable. It should not have been coming there. We would have been very happy. Now, this is modeled current basically scenario, and this is one of the ways that you can test a model. The point is that current distribution you know, right? You know, that is documented, that is before you. Now, if your model projection matches with the observed projections, then you trust basically the model that is going to actually say project your future projections also correctly. Now, in case it does not resemble the observed occurrences of this species, then all is not valuable model. You need to actually look at it afresh. Now, then we had RCP 2050 to 80 and then RCP 8.5. Now, cutting long story short, if we look at this red part here, it is going away. Look at here, red, this is native, it is going to exist there in the event of climate change at different time periods. Now, this is an RCP scenario, a sort of a doubling of carbon dioxide compared to present, what is going to happen to Parthenium hysterophorus? Now it was invasive somewhere here, it was invasive here, it was invasive here. It was very red in the earlier slide, right? It was very red here. But that redness basically is not now there, which means that the area that was suitable for Parthenium hysterophorus to grow is declining, right? And as such, the area that is suitable for Parthenium hysterophorus to grow at the global level is declining. That means in the event of climate change, Parthenium hysterophorus is not going to be benefited. Instead, Parthenium hysterophorus is going to suffer on account of climate change. Its area, suitable area, is going to shrink, and as such it will be less of a problem where it was in the event of climate change. Nevertheless, it is a projection. Look at India. Again, as we did with the global climate, we have the occurrence record of India before us on table, which we have compiled, which we have observed. Now this is modeled current scenario, resembles very well. 74% of Indian space is occupied by Parthenium hysterophorus, except for this area which is Rajasthan, which is desert. It doesn't grow. And look at this part, this is Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir, I mean, this is Kashmir, this is Jammu. It doesn't grow there. And look at the projections, right? At this scale also, at the scale of India as country, the Parthenium hysterophorus suitable area is going to shrink. It is not going to be as serious a problem as it is currently in the event of climate change by 2050 or 2080, whatever the RCP scenario. But if you look at Jammu and Kashmir, where we are interested, isn't it? A reverse trend is noticed. Now this is the Jammu part. Jammu and Kashmir has three provinces: Jammu, Ladakh, and Kashmir. Jammu is subtropical climate, Ladakh is cold, arid, and then Kashmir is a climate, temperate climate, as you have in Europe. Now, if you look at the current scenario models over here, this is where we are. This is extreme north. At some places you have it there. Uri is a place where you have it because it's a subtropical place within Kashmir. But it doesn't grow here. In Srinagar, you won't here. Now look at basically the models. Look at this. It is very red here, right? And this is Kashmir. That means in the event of climate change, Parthenium hysterophorus at world level is going to shrink in occurrence. At level of India, it is going to shrink, but it's going to be a huge problem on our plate in Kashmir. And I must tell you that we have information, credible basically, the field data available, which points towards this fact that this species is going to come. Reason is that we have couple of populations noticed which are self-sustaining populations. It is tending to now naturalize, and there is possibility that this species may invade. Now, ordinarily, without climate change, you should not be expecting this species coming over. Now, the point is that you have to actually look at the worst invasives, isn't it, from the perspective of climate change also, and predict as to which species are going to be likely basically invaders in our area, and take necessary measures for their management. Now, as earlier question was asked, now once a species comes in, established, it's a huge problem monetarily, you can't basically then control it. Then with regard to, once it is coming, we know Parthenium is a problem, we can say, educate the planners, isn't it, the foresters, that in case you find this plant, you should basically get rid of it as quickly as possible. Why? Otherwise, if you allow it grow, it is going to spread and it is going to cause problems to you. Now, the second aspect was very, I will not take much time, is very interesting. Now, issue is this that Manzoor also had basically dealt with some detail. Issue is that you have seen that Parthenium hysterophorus is native of South and Central America. Good. Then it is invasive in Australia. It is invasive, say, for example, in India. It is invasive in African countries, so on and so forth. Now, issue is this, and we asked this question. Most of the studies do it like this. What is the niche? What is its niche, say, for example, in native place? and what is its niche in the non-native place, right? Are you, say, having the similar requirements that you had in US? Are you basically having similar requirements met when you say move to India? Or you are a different adapted person, whatever requirements you had in US, you didn't get them in India, you have adapted, and now naturally you have changed your niche, you have made different kinds of, say, compromises in order to survive and then to perpetuate it. I mean, this is what species also do. There is a possibility that a species moves from one place to another, it gets the same kind of environmental space which it was occupying, it is good, it's almost a sort of a homecoming. Then there are possibilities that in some places it may not get that environmental space with which it had earlier adapted, right? And then what has happened is that over a period of time it has adapted, it has evolved in the non-native place, and now that adaptation has allowed it to occupy that environmental space which it was not occupying previously, right? And this can be done. What we did is, now we basically compared the niche of this species with, say, India, with Madagascar, with all those countries in which it was non-niche, right? And it's a very interesting thing. I mean, it's a very interesting reading. And that is very, I will explain only one, rest you can very easily understand. Now, this circle tells you that two basically axes, this is done through principal component analysis, ENV. You say that one axis is determining 38.04% distribution of Parthenium hysterophorus, and the other axis is determining 27.1% distribution of Parthenium hysterophorus. That means principal component axis 1 and principal component axis 2. These are the two major axes which determine the occurrence of this species, right? This is one. Second, this basically is very interesting, and you need to look at it. This is green and this is red. And then there is a solid line, then there is a dotted line. Green and red. Green means the niche space in native region, and red means the niche space in non-native region. This means the 100% niche. Some people use 70% of this, or some people use 50% of it, because they say usually niche full 100% is not fulfilled. As such, in case we assume that 50% of the spaces which a species could have occupied, it has occupied, whether it had occupied all of them or not. Now, there are different colors as well, right? And I put it somewhere here. Now, blue color represents the niche stability, this blue. This blue part is telling you that it is the niche space which is common to Parthenium hysterophorus in native and non-native region. This is the space, exactly same space this species occupies in native region as well. Now look at the green. Now green means that the blue, and the green means that part which it has occupied in the native but has not occupied in the non-native region. That in this green part here, green part here, green part here, this is that environmental space which this species occupies in native place, that means South America, but these species are present in non-native region, but this cannot occupy it. Why? Because there is some other species already sitting there. This is also not an issue. Even if this was occupying, it was not an issue. Now what is the issue is the red part, this part, which means that in India, this species Parthenium hysterophorus is occupying those niche spaces which normally it was not adapted to occupy in its native region. Which means that it has moved from, say, South America to India. Some part, it occupies certain environmental spaces in India. Certain of these spaces are exactly true copies of those species which occur in South America. But there are certain spaces which are occupied by the species in India which it has not occupied in its native region, which means that there is a sort of a niche expansion shown by this species where in India. It has expanded its niche, right, which is beyond basically the confines of its niche in its native region. That say, for example, you would use corn here, isn't it? But you would not use the type of rice that we eat. But what has happened when you have mode, you are using corn also, but you have adapted to using something else also. Now that means your food preferences have expanded. You are utilizing the food preferences that you had in your native place, but to adapt, you are basically using the other food preferences as well. This is it. But you are used to taking certain juices here in a native place, but those juices presumably are not available at the non-native place. That means you shun them, you can't take them. Now this is exactly what this species is doing. Now second, the two graphs show equivalence. I mean, there has to be a test. Whether the overlap is complete, whether overlap is not complete, a metric is used, what is called as Schooner's D. Right? Anyway, it's a distance metric. Now it varies from, its value basically varies from some 1 basically 0 to 1. More closer D to 1, right, to 1, more overlap is there. More niche overlap is there. Less basically, away from 1 it is, nearer the 0. The preferences are different, the choices are different, the niches are different. This is one. People wanted to test it also in a different way. They do many tests, right? In this equivalency, what they do is that they pool all occurrences of native as well as non-native, right? And then just basically, isn't it, divide the occurrences randomly into two, native and non-native, right? Run 100, 1000 iterations, right? The one with the diamond is basically the observed value of D, and this histogram represents the simulated value, right? And then whatever if the difference between the simulated and the observed value is much more, is statistically significant, is more than 0.05, you say that niches basically have differed. So in this case, they do it slightly differently. They do not pool the occurrences. They keep the native same, but they vary randomly the non-native, and then they make comparisons. In cutting long story short, they are basically metric which they use to test whether niches have diverged basically of a species once it has moved from a native place to non-native, or it has confined itself basically to same niche which it was occupying in its native region. This is true of South America. If you look at this South Africa, you don't find that red area, which means though non-native in Africa, non-native in India, the niche basically dynamics of this species is highly different. As such, the take-home message for youngsters is that you need basically to examine this niche, say at a small spatial scales. Why? Because in India, the relation niche was different, and then in Africa it was different. So is Taiwan. In Taiwan it is expanding. Look at the red part of it. It is expanding. Lot of it is expanding, and lot of it is unbuilt. That means it is adapting there genetically, whatever the adaptation, I don't know, but it is moving out of the space which it used to occupy in the non-native region. This is true of Ethiopia, Madagascar, so on and so forth, Caledonia. Then, Reunion is a small island in France, associated with France. Anyway, now the conclusions are simple, that there would be reduction in the range size of Parthenium hysterophorus, right, at a global scale under all concentration pathways, under all climate change scenarios at all time periods. Now, the reduction could be somewhere basically from say 16% to 14%. By and large, 14 to 16% reduction in the area of occurrence in Parthenium hysterophorus would occur under climate change scenario at global level. A similar trend was noticed at in India, and there, as on date, 75% of the area is occupied by Parthenium hysterophorus, and this is going to actually go down to around 52%. That means that India, much of the land area is going to become unsuitable for occurrence of Parthenium hysterophorus congress grass in the event of climate change. But reverse is true of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, what we have changed, we have not changed anything except for the spatial scale we have changed. Now here, we are having as on date, there is just 13 point, in Jammu you have it. you have 13% basically area occupied by this plant. This is going to actually expand in future in our area also, and then naturally we need to be alive to the reality of new set of species coming to our place, right? Now, what this study is doing is it's having a sort of a say underpinning which is bit say theoretical. The theoretical underpinning of this presentation is that that you need not to lump, you need not to consider a species to be equivalent in terms of niche in all its non-native areas. This is not a fact. And it is, I mean, it is quite obvious. Reason being that a species in Kashmir, I mean, Parthenium was moved 100 years before, and somewhere else it has just moved. Now that means its niche is still basically adjusting. As such, lumping these together would not make a good study. Instead, separating these small units, isn't it, would make basically a good study. Now the second important thing is that we need to actually look at scale as well. At a global, I mean, usually people do not do study like this, that they would dissect it into small scale scales. They would take it together, and then the conclusion, if we would have taken global data, would have been that there would be decrease in the occurrence of this species. But at a small scale, isn't it, it doesn't hold water. Now, what is the management basically imperative of this species? At least you are able, I mean, the principle in invasion biology is a species is guilty unless you prove it innocent. If nothing, at least you can tell your managers that there is a potential risk of this species moving into your say areas. As such, you need to be very alive to the situation. I will tell you that in case we were knowing such type of things earlier, we could have saved many things. Manzoor showed Dal Lake, and in Dal Lake, you have, I mean, species, this Azola, I mean, cristata, it almost overran it. It was reported in university, our university just on the bank of Dal Lake. It was reported in 2011. What we didn't do is that we didn't alarm people that this species is going to be a problem, you remove it. And it would have been very easy at that time. Within a period of 5-10 years, now it has overrun the lake, and it will take you, say, millions of dollars to control it. And if at all, you would be successful. Now, the point is that climate change is a reality. There are respectable voices of dissent as well. I mean, many people say that it is not happening. But fact of the matter is that we in our place are having signatures of certain species coming, which otherwise we would not have been expecting in our places. And we think that climate change is operative in our place. We expect a new species moving into our place, and we need basically to be alive basically to the situation, right? Second important thing which is very essential for us to keep in mind is that, say for example, I mean, this is what I ask myself also. There is a possibility a native species also could be at times very risky in difference. And now, Manzoor showed Impatiens glandulifera. Now, Impatiens glandulifera is our native. It moved to Europe, right? It spread. Who stops that invasive Impatiens glandulifera from Europe to move back into Kashmir? Nobody stops it. Now that means there is a potential possibility of having in Kashmir native Impatiens glandulifera, which is non-invasive, and that Impatiens glandulifera, which has come via Europe after has acquired the invasive traits and has moved into Kashmir. You cannot equate this Impatiens glandulifera with the native Impatiens glandulifera, and you have to be careful about this Impatiens glandulifera as well, which has come all the way basically after traversing Europe, getting the necessary traits that make it invasive. I mean, that way it is very interesting. There are everyday new things coming to everybody's mind. Anyway, it would be a challenge for the human beings to say somehow confront the invasive species. But one thing is sure, that in our place the principle is that if a common man tells us that this species is creating problems, we consider it as invasive. Now, definition, ecological definition, scientific discourse apart, if a common man basically in a range tells us that this species is troubling me, I mean, it was not there, it has come, it's giving me this trouble, that trouble, we think that this species is a problem. And then there is always a growing list of such species which people are complaining about. and as such we believe that invasion is a reality, and then we, at least in our place, would not deny it. Thank you. And I forgot to tell you, I mean, she is the student who does this work. She's a college lecturer. Shazia is her name. She leaves her children back home and then goes out for training, because we do not have a strong, say, R expertise available in our university. She had to go out a couple of times to Bangalore, learn it, and she has somehow mastered it to a larger extent. We are also learning it. We expect that there would be people, expertise available here also, and then we will be further, say, strengthening this area, and then we'll be making better predictions. I thank Beverly Hartland and Robert Paul for providing me an opportunity to come over and speak here. I thank you.